Well, good evening and welcome. We're so glad that you're here on this Wednesday evening. Have a very special presentation for you. Appreciate our WMU, our missions, and all that they do, and have not only a good presentation, but a very special guest they'll be introducing to you very shortly. All right, take just a moment, stand up, turn around, wave at somebody around you. Say, I'm sure glad to see you in the Lord's house tonight. All right. That's great. That is great. Thank you so much. And you please be seated. All right. Peggy Trammell, come on up here, girl. There you go. There you go. All right. We've got some great stuff here. You take the microphone and talk to them, all right? Thank you, ma'am. Welcome, Peggy, tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. We are ready for our 2021, started to go back 100 years, 2021 International Mission Study. Some of you may not know what the International Mission Study is and what it involves, but when we go into the international emphasis with the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, we have the International Mission Study first, where the International Mission Board and National WMU select a country that we have missionaries serving in, and we study about those needs, their prayer needs, and about the people that they serve, so that we can pray more intelligently for them, and especially during the week of prayer. When the last Sunday, I think it's the 28th of this month, over into the first week of December, we'll be having the week of prayer that has all the missionaries listed that we will pray for individually. So this is the first step for our international missions, and this is the 15th year that we have done this here at Immanuel. So thank you so much for coming and for participating, even though our numbers are small tonight, but we can still make a big difference in the Lord's work by being informed about what He's doing, and especially this year in Prague. We were fortunate enough to get one of the missionaries, and this happened back in July, when we found out what country we would be studying. And I had already met Dr. Suter and his wife at the Hurricane Church last year, where Ken has served as interim pastor for the last 11 years. But they visited there and told us, about their service. And then when we got the information and the material to study on Prague, and I read that the Solders were serving there, and I called him. I sent an email, wrote a letter, and I didn't hear anything. And I thought, well, they're busy. They can't come. And weeks elapsed, and then I got a phone call on a Wednesday evening saying their schedule would allow it. So I'm so glad he's here. His wife couldn't be here, but he's going to share with us tonight what the Lord has done through him, and especially the deaf ministry that they have had such a wonderful part in. So, Brother Mark, would you just come and share what's on your heart? Please welcome him.
The X is where I'm supposed to stand, I guess. It's good to be with you tonight. I met the Trammells about a year ago, a little more than a year ago. My wife and I just showed up there at Hurricane Church on a Sunday morning, and were really well received, welcomed, and met one of their members who was a deacon by the name of James, and he told me that he had been in that church. He was 92, I think, at the time. Said he'd been in that church all his life, and he didn't ever remember having a missionary in their church. And I thought, well, that's just wrong. And so my wife and I have endeavored to try to visit different churches in the association, both here and on the other side of Robertson County over the course of the last year, just touching base, letting the churches know how much we appreciate them, the gifts that they give through the Lottie Moon offering and through the cooperative program, but particularly the fact that they pray for us. And so my wife and I moved to the field in 1996, and we moved to the city of Prague. And so I'm going to have I can see you back there. I'm going to have them run some pictures here in a minute, and I'll just comment on some of the things about Prague. We went out as missionaries to reach deaf people. So we were church planners. We didn't go start interpreted ministries. We went to reach deaf people and plant deaf churches. It's kind of a different approach than what we see here in the United States a lot of the time, but deaf people have their own culture, their own language, and if you look, when we start ethnic churches, we start Vietnamese churches, we start Chinese churches, we start Hispanic churches, but for deaf people, we just set them over in the corner and we interpret for them. And they look at themselves around the world as being their own language, their own people group, and so we share the gospel, and when they come to faith, we disciple them, we group them into church, we train them as leaders, and we send them out as missionaries. And so that was our initial assignment as church planners among the deaf of the Czech Republic. And we lived in Prague. Prior to that, we had spent 5 years going back and forth between the U.S. I was a pastor of a church plant in Indiana, and my wife, we weren't married at the time because we had just met, but she and I I had a call to missions international. She had a call to work with the deaf because she had deaf parents. And so when we married and moved to the field, we went to work with deaf people internationally. Before that, we were doing trips back and forth as volunteers, and in the process, we started out in Romania and began to reach deaf Romanians and plant deaf churches in Romania. And we stopped off in Prague on the way back from one of our trips to do an assessment there. And so after we married and after we were assigned with the International Mission Board as church planners with the deaf, they put us in Prague because we helped plant 5 deaf churches in Romania in 5 years. And in the years that followed, the deaf themselves in Romania planted 30 more. And so we felt like, let's not mess that up. Let's go somewhere else where there isn't anything going on. And so that's why we got an assignment in Prague. And I have to tell you, I loved living in Prague. If it was just about where I wanted to live and that's it, I'd have never left. But we spent 7 years living in Prague, and then we moved to Budapest for 3 years. Our responsibilities expanded for 5 different countries, and then all of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. And then in 2006, my wife and I moved to China, and we spent 5 years there. And then the IMB asked us to come back and coordinate the work that's going on among the deaf around the globe with the IMB. And so that's kind of where we are now. I didn't go out to do administration. And administration is okay, I can do it, but I much prefer being among people, sharing the gospel, and giving them an opportunity to know a Savior that in many respects they've not ever met. And so that was very, very helpful to my soul in China and as well as in Eastern Europe. So I think more than anything else, the focus of this study is on Prague, and I want to make sure I have this right. Yeah, okay. I'll make reference to him in a minute. Go ahead and start the slides, and I'll just kind of walk you through some of the things that you'll find in Prague. If you've never been to Europe and you're thinking, where should I go in Europe? People want to go to Paris, they want to go to London, they want to go to Berlin, this is a place to go. It's not nearly as expensive, and it's incredibly beautiful. During the Second World War, this was one city that didn't get leveled by bombs. And so you have architecture that goes back, 3 different kinds of architecture that go way, way back. And so you see them buildings one next to another from one era, another era, and another era, and it's just an incredibly beautiful place. This is the Vltava River that flows through the center of the city. Go to the next slide. Charles Bridge, named for King Karel. We called him Charles, but they called him Karel. I always thought, well, Karel's a girl's name, isn't it? But they said, no, that's just the way you Americans think about things. So Charles Bridge, it's a very famous bridge. All of the statues that are on it have to do with kings and priests and history and on and on. And it's a very picturesque place, made from stone and cement that was made from egg whites, and a lot of people died building the bridge. Anyway, it's a very old historic bridge, an incredible place to see. Now go to the next slide. This is on the east side of Prague. The primary means to get around Prague is either tram, which is here, or the metro, the subway, or a bus. And this building that you see back there in the back, you see, that's not old architecture. That's not ancient architecture. That's bizarre architecture. That's called the Fred and Ginger building. Some of you know who Fred and Ginger are. There was one bomb in the city of Prague that exploded during the Second World War, and it took out the building that was there before they put this thing there. And this is called the dancing building, because this is supposed to be Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing. And if you look at it compared to you see here the yellow buildings, and all the buildings around it don't look anything at all like that. It's an eyesore. It's my opinion. I'm a foreigner. I'm a dumb American. I don't have to play like I'm dumb. I just am. So anyway, this was on the east side of town. Tram number 12, I think. Anyway, go to the next slide. We'll run through, and then, so this is the monastery on the west side of the city that sets up on the hill, and it says raging religious wars in the 17th century are responsible for the lack of spiritual interest in Czechia. That's, the Czechs call it Czechia or Česká republika. But the land of the Czechs, the Czechia. The Czechs, 10 years ago, I looked at a list of the most atheistic countries in all of the world. Anybody want to guess which country in the world, if you were thinking about it right now, which country in the world is the most atheistic country if you were thinking about today? And it's not the Czech Republic. What? North Korea. That's correct. North Korea is the most atheistic country in all of the world. Number 2 is the Czech Republic. And there are some reasons. And again, the religious wars, a lot of this went on, a lot of fighting went on, and it was all done in the name of the church, all done in the name of God. And the Catholic Church was very, they were embattled with one another, and they were embattled with the people that wanted to be more, follow more on what the Bible taught. And the man in this picture, in this statue right down here, his name is it says John Hus. The Czechs call him Jan Hus. That's how you pronounce it in their language. And he was a reformer. 100 years before Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther, who ushered in the Reformation of the church and ushered in the evangelical church as it developed over the years. Jan Hus was 100 years before him, And Jan Hus was, again, he was somebody, he had a church, he was the pastor of a church in Prague, and he made a deal with the Catholic Church. They were upset that he was drawing people away from the church, and they were emphasizing more and more on the Bible and less on the traditions of the church. And so they invited him to come with promise of safe passage to meet the leaders of the Roman Catholic Church. And he went, and they had their discussion, and they debated back and forth, and then they honored their promise. They gave him safe passage to meet them, but then they killed him. And this was 100 years before Martin Luther. Now, the interesting thing is the Czechs today have this statue of Jan Hus in the center of their old town square. And they look at him as a revolutionary. They look at him as an individual who was who pushed forward the agenda of independence and freedom and the elevation of the Czech people. And you start talking to them about the history of what he did and why he did it, and they're clueless. And it's interesting because in addition to being one of the most atheistic countries in the world, they are also one of the most highly emphasis on intellectual study and university. And Charles University, which is in the center of Prague, is one of the most esteemed places you can study in Europe. And so, but they don't know that Jan Hus was a reformer who sought to bring freedom to the church and take it out of the oppression of the structure of Roman Catholicism. And so, in addition to that, over the period of time, they have become so secular. And during communism, after the Second World War ended, the Russians basically dominated that part of the world. They had an agreement with the West that said, okay, these countries from Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, Poland, all of these countries all the way down to the Balkans, down to Greece, they will be under the protective wing of the Soviets. The Czech Republic was one of those countries, and so communism just dominated. There were pastors that spent time in prison, pastors that were executed, pastors that were arrested and beaten. Persecution of the church was rampant at that time. But one of the reasons why the Czechs still today hold up their intellectual knowledge and their intellectual emphasis and kind of discount the whole issue that has to do with spiritual things. And they're not uninterested in spiritual things, but spiritual things that have any kind of ties to the church. One of the things that has driven them further away from the church is the fact that during the time of the communists, if you were to look at all of the different vocations that people had, butcher, a baker, candlestick maker, whatever, all of the different jobs that they had. They worked on the trains, they worked on the trams, they worked on the subway, they worked in law, they worked at the university, whatever. There was a higher percentage of informants among the clergy than any other vocation. So you had Catholic priests, and in some cases, evangelical pastors who were turning in their own people to the government in order to get protection from the communists themselves. And so when you figure that there was a higher percentage among the clergy that were informing on their own people, that's another reason why the Czechs are very interested in spiritual things, but they're not interested in the church, because they look at the church as just another oppressive arm that came out of communism that continues to oppress people. And so You can have spiritual conversations with them, but oftentimes if you lead them to faith, there's still that resistance to engaging with the church. So a lot of times what has to be done is when they come to faith and they understand that it's how important it is for them to be involved as the body of Christ, they have to understand what the church is and not what it was or what it stood for during the communist times. And so oftentimes they form cell groups, house church groups, and they will start churches among themselves in the home. But they're still a tough nut to crack. They're really hardcore, and they're proud of their atheism. They're proud of, I lived in China for 5 years, and those people are hardcore atheists too. But they practice things in the Chinese culture that are closely tied to Buddhism. And they just say, oh, that's not Buddhism, that's Chinese culture. Yeah, well, it looks pretty much the same as Buddhism. And Buddhism came long before Chinese culture. Well, but these folks in the Czech Republic, there's interest in mysticism and spiritual things, but not Christianity and not the church. So go to the next one. We camped out there probably way too long. This is a picture of the Prague Castle, and up at the top you'll see the big church, St. Vitus Cathedral. It's funny because I went in that church the first time. It was in the summer, and it was hot. It doesn't get real hot in the Czech Republic, but it was hot that day. And I walked in to this church, and there was this bowl that had water in it. And I reached my hand in there and kind of cooled my face. And this guy came running at me, screaming at me, cursing at me. I didn't know what he was saying. He was speaking in Czech, but that was where the holy water was. And, you're not supposed to dab your brow and stuff like that. I should have known better, but I was hot, So my wife, she said, no, you're not going to do that every time we go visit a Catholic church. I said, oh, this is a Catholic church. I forgot. So I didn't mean to be disrespectful, but nonetheless, this is probably the most famous. This is where King Charles is buried. This is the place where at one time was kind of the center of the Holy Roman Empire in terms of its spiritual emphasis, and King Charles was one of the key guys in all of that. And it's a huge castle. It's where the government now has they have their parliament and all the other things, the president's offices and stuff. It's impressive, sits way up high, but there's some good little cafes down there right along the water's edge that I spent a lot more time there sharing the gospel with folks and stuff. But it's an impressive place to visit. Next slide. They're big about folklore. You see the thing behind these guys? That green thing back there? That's a furnace for all practical purposes. It's made out of porcelain, and in the days gone by, they would fill that full of coal and wood and fire, and that would heat their home. That would heat their rooms, and it really did a good job. So, but folklore, dancing in the traditional dress, and music's a big thing. Mozart's favorite place to come and perform and drink. And I don't know which was more important for him, drinking and I'm not talking about water, I'm talking about alcohol, was Prague. And he did a lot of there's a theater there in Prague that is called Mozart's Theater. But nonetheless, music is a very big thing there. So go to the next slide. Again, Charles Bridge in the fall. You can see the leaves are starting to turn. At the end of Charles Bridge, on one side, and you can't see it in this picture, but at the other end, they have these towers, powder towers. There are hundreds of spires all over the city, all designed to point to God. And there are churches that dot the landscape everywhere. Just to the left, right? Yeah. To the left of this tower that you can see, there's a huge church there. Catholic church. Where we lived in Prague for 7 years, there was a huge church, the Church of St. Ludmila. And we would walk there every day to catch either the subway or the tram. And that church is huge. It's got 2 big spires on it. And as we walked by there day after day after day, and on the weekends and stuff, we would look. There wasn't anybody at church. We would go on the weekends, and sometime on Saturday night, there would be 10 or 15 people. We'd go and look in the door. I didn't put my hand in the holy water, but I would look in the door. And they'd have maybe 10 or 15 people, and so they just don't have any. So they have converted most of these churches now. By converted, I mean they use the churches primarily for concerts now. So musicians who want to come and perform, they'll perform at one of these churches. Not Christian music, just classical music or whatever music. And they'll do that. And the churches let them do it because the fact that it's really the only way they can have to generate income. When the communists fell, the churches came in, the Catholic Church came in and said, we need to reclaim our churches. And the new government said, why? They said, because the churches belong to us. And they said, yeah, but there isn't anybody who goes to church. They said, doesn't matter. So there's this ongoing struggle, even to this day, about the legitimacy of these churches. But again, you don't find but a handful of people in these large, huge churches. 2 and 3 times the size of this auditorium. And they have the table set up and everything, but, people just don't come. Church is not, the people that do come are older folks who still can remember back the significance of the church before communism or during communism. So go to the next slide. There you go. Church bells beckon the city of 100 spires, but people did not respond. You hear church bells on the hour in many places all over the city, and lots of churches with the double spires. But spiritually, it's a very dead, depressing culture. So that's why we have missionaries there, share the gospel, tell them about Jesus, and help them understand that part of your history was about the gospel, and you don't even know your history about the guy who was your reformer to bring liberty to the people, was about bringing spiritual liberty. So next slide. Yeah, this is a scene from the fall or maybe the winter, I don't know, but there's another castle besides the Prague castle, and let's see. Well, no, I think that in the background, that's the Prague castle. This picture is taken from the old castle, the first castle, that's basically kind of in ruins now. There's not any building. There's a big church there, but there's no building there, no castle. And it was the oldest castle. There's like over 100 castles just in the Czech Republic. I mean, incredible. Some of them are in ruins, but some of you go in, you go, wow, this is incredible. I bet it was cold here in the wintertime, and because it's cold there in the summertime in these big old block buildings. So another picture of the Vltava. Go to the next slide. I have to read that up here. Populated with spires representing a place to worship. The people did not possess the people possess no spiritual foundation nor desire to learn about God. That's what basically I've described to you. Again, they're interested in spiritual things. They want to know, they want to have spiritual conversations, but they don't have an interest in the church. Next slide. Now, I was here one time, and I never went back. It's a big spa, swimming pool. That's really big about going to the spa. If you have a crook in your back, you have neck pain, or you have, arthritis or something, go to the spa. If you're having trouble seeing, or your sinuses are stopped, go to the spa. Anything and everything, go to the spa. That's where you start if you want to get well. So I didn't really believe in going to the spa, so I didn't go back. I did see this. It's quite impressive, but they have them all over Europe. All the major cities have these, and so this is in this just north of the center of town. Next one. Now, there's the Prague Castle at night. It's an impressive sight. But again, St. Vitus Cathedral, 2 huge spires, a third one there. The one there in the middle, the one that's in the foreground, it's in the foreground of the church. Below is buried all of these priests and all of some of these kings and stuff. And you can actually walk down in there and can't touch anything, can't put your hand in the holy water. They don't have holy water down there, but you can walk by and you can see all of these tombs that these guys are buried in. And they're important to the Czechs in their history. And what they don't realize is that many of these guys were people who really tried to fight to bring liberty to the church. Now, the ones who fought the hardest, like Jan Hus, he didn't get buried up there because he wasn't welcome. He pushed against the church. But some of these guys were good about trying to help people understand. It's interesting because all the things that the Czechs like to do, they like to read. So you give them a Bible and they'll want to read it. But I've had, again, and I don't want to hit the horse too many times with the crop about the Roman Catholic Church, okay? But the reality was I had priest after priest after priest tell me, look, we don't really want the average folks reading the Bible. I said, and why would you not want that? They said, well, you've been to seminary? Yeah. You've been to Bible school, to seminary, and don't you understand? I said, no, I don't. Help, enlighten me a little bit. They said, look, and I got this from the Orthodox as well. Catholics and Orthodox are not the same. They have a lot of things in common. But both of them would say to me over and over, oh, look, the Bible is too holy of a book to be dirtied by the hands of the common people. I said, I'm still not enlightened. Can you give me some more explanation? And what happened is again and again and again, when we would lead people to faith and we would help them understand what was going on through the witness of the Bible, oftentimes they would say, well, my parents or other parts of our family that have ties to the Catholic Church, they think this. And here's what the Bible says. So where is the disconnect? How do we... And what happened is that over and over again, when there was a conflict between what the Bible said and what the church taught, well, that's why we don't want the people reading the Bible. Because there are things that we do in our traditions, in our church. There are things that we embrace that are not in the Bible. Now, they never said that. They just said that the tradition of the church and the witness of the Scripture are equal in value. And what I found is that wasn't true. That the traditions of the church actually had higher value than the witness of the Scripture, because they would always default to that. And so we had to fight that battle again and again and again. We don't want the people necessarily to have a Bible, because it will expose things that we do that aren't in the Bible, or it expose things that we don't do that are in the Bible. So anyway, so next slide. I can't camp out on these long. Again, we talked a little bit about the some of the music and some of the traditions, the culture and everything. Very festive. I mean, they have all kinds of holidays, and they dress up like this in different parts, and they have different kinds of clothes that they wear, and they have these competitions. And the Charles Bridge that we saw, you saw a picture of, there are people playing music on that from one end to the other, selling their CDs and and everything. And it's just fun to watch some of the things that they do like this. And we went to different cities and would stay the weekend and meet with people and share the gospel. And oftentimes we would find that things were going on in the city square, Old Town Square like this. Next one. So this is really an important point they make here. They prefer to spend their time in nature or following some Eastern beliefs that will not disrupt their peaceful lifestyle. Now, the one thing that I disagree with in this particular set of the sentence here is their lifestyle isn't all that peaceful. They don't like conflict. They don't like any kind of controversy, and they like to live. But their lives, oh my goodness, spiritually, they want to talk about things, but they don't. The reason that they reject Christianity is because it demands that a person give up their loyalty and give it to Christ. And if they're going to follow Christ, that means they've got to stop living the way that they live. And I'm just thinking about how peaceful it was. We went to one city outside of Prague, about 2 hours, and we went there every other week. We took the train, went there every other week. We stayed with a local family. And we went in first to the place where the deaf people met, the deaf club. And when we first went there, one of the things that we found out is this where the deaf people come 3 nights a week. And they had a bar where they sold liquor. And they had a place where they sold tobacco. And they had a place where they watched TV. And they had a place, this is just the reality of it. So we went in and the president of the deaf club said, won't you come in and tell us a little bit about American culture, and then, you want to tell us about the Bible. We really don't know much about the Bible. And so we started telling Bible stories. We started we'd start with creation, and we would go story by story, not through the whole Bible, but after 2 years, we had been through a good bit of the Bible. And it was interesting that they would drink and carry on and curse and make fun of us and stuff. And after about 4 or 5 months had passed, they weren't drinking while we were telling Bible stories. They weren't carrying on. They weren't watching TV. They shut the TV off. And at the end of the first year, there were 12 or 15 new believers that had come out of that group that had now formed the first church among the deaf in that city ever. And so the things that they look at as peaceful, alcoholism is incredibly high percentage there. Just things going on that just disrupt. So they want to follow things in nature and Eastern beliefs that won't disrupt their lifestyle. I don't think it's all that peaceful, honestly. So go to the next slide. There's the bridges. Charles Bridge is the second one, and then you go on down, and you see the spire up there on the left. That's the old castle. That's the church at the old castle. That's the church of St. Peter and St. Paul. It is a beautiful place. It really is. And Charles Bridge is full of people every day of the year. All right, next slide. This is Old Town Square. And this picture of Jan Hus and this statue is right there in the middle where that circle is that's dark. And this is their Christmas market. The Germans started I can't say it in German, I can't remember, but it's the Christmas market that almost all the German cities have now. Started out in Dresden, in that area, and it's spread all over. Now the Czechs have it, and it's an incredibly beautiful time of year when the Czechs do Christmas. It's funny because we learned some things early on when we went there. We talked to them about the meaning of Christmas. The first sermon I ever preached in Czech Sign Language, I talked about, the meaning of these different parts of Christmas. And it's funny because one of the deaf persons came up to me and everything. They said, now, in the Czech language, you can take a name and you can add a couple of letters at the end and make it a diminutive form. So if I would say, this man's name is John, and they would say, oh, but we call him Johnny. It's a kind of an affectionate term, but it's a diminutive form. And so they had the name Ježíš, Jesus, but the Jesus who was at the birth at Christmas was Ježíšku, the diminutive form, little Jesus. And some of the deaf kids came to me and they said, we thought that the Ježíšku, who came to our house after we went to sleep and put presents on the tree, was a rabbit. I said, no, the baby Jesus wasn't a rabbit. But they leave the window open so that Ježíšku can come in and deliver the bread. It's not Santa Claus. They have their own Santa Claus, Saint Mikuláš, but they celebrate him on December 7th. Or 6th, 5th, 6th, or 7th. I can't remember. December 7th, that's a holiday. We observe D-Day. I think it's December 5th. And so Mikuláš, they have Mikuláš who gives gifts to the kids. They have an angel, and then they have the chert. The chert is the devil. And so on December 5th, all three of them are going around town, and the devil's trying to grab up the little kids, and he's all blackened with coal, and then the angel's going to break them loose, and then Saint Mikuláš gives them a gift. But when we get to Christmas, we're talking about the birth of Jesus, and so they put up a tree. They all look like Charlie Brown Christmas trees. I guarantee there's not any full ones. And yet it's just an incredible thing to watch. We got invited to go and be in their home, one of the homes of one of the deaf families, and they don't have turkey. They have carp. Now, it's fun to catch carp, but I've never really had any desire to eat carp. I don't know. Is carp good? It's not really a very good fish, right? Anyway, it's kind of bony, and anyway. So that's what they have. They cut off the head and make soup out of the head, and then they eat this. And the tradition is, if you're going to do it right, you go and you buy a full-size carp in the market. You bring it home. You put it in your tub so you don't bathe for about 4 or 5 days. The carp gets the tub, and it gets the tub. And it flops around and flops around. And then, like the day before, the 23rd, they celebrate Christmas on the 24th. The day before, you take the carp, you take it out, and you beat it to death with a hammer or something. And then you cut off the head, make soup, and then you eat the meat of the fish, and you have potato salad with it. And that's their Christmas dinner. Well, it's really inconvenient to have to buy a big carp, take it all the way home, put it in your tub. So what they do now is they have markets like this, and they will have these great big tubs out there full of carp. You can go get a carp, pay for it. They'll put it up on a table, and they'll beat it to death right there in front of you. And then they'll cut it, and you can take it home in a bag. And so in the winter, around Christmas time, it gets cold at night. And so the streets are often flowing with water and blood, fish blood just everywhere. And so you have to be careful of not only where you step, but make sure if you slip and fall, you don't fall in a bunch of bloody ice. So, but the markets are still festive, and it is a great time. We had more people that came to faith during Christmas time than at any other time of the year. I know you've got the thing about Easter here, and they've kind of perverted that too, but they have a special thing that they do with the lamb, the cake that they make, and they sell these hand-painted eggs. They're real eggs, and you just, how can you paint something like that without breaking it? So anyway, but Christmas time was a time we really found that people were probably more responsive to the gospel than any other time. Go to the next slide. We're running out of time, and this is the inside of, I think, St. Vitus Cathedral in the back part, which is kind of like the Holy of Holies. Next slide, that's the Nativity Church. Oh, by the way, all of these churches, I don't know who these people are. I think they're some of our missionaries, but I don't know them. But it's interesting because one of the things that all the churches have some kind of a special piece of Bible or apostle or early church fathers paraphernalia. There was one of these churches that had the shin bone of James, the brother of Jesus, or James, the son of Alphaeus. One of the Jameses in the Bible had his shin bone. People would come, and they had this bone out there. It didn't look like a human bone to me, but nonetheless, it was on display. People came, and they say their prayers over these things that and one had it was a vial of, I hate to say, but anyway, it was a vial of liquid that had belonged to one of the apostles, and people came to see it. So you can imagine what was in it. But nonetheless, the people would come to these churches just to see these the icons or something that was drawn or something. And that's really the only reason that they came, was to see this. They had no interest whatsoever in the message of the gospel and the church. And so that it is a field that's white into harvest. But again, some of these are hard nuts to crack. Again, these are some of our missionaries in Prague. Again, I don't know who they are. I haven't lived in Prague since 2006. So next slide. Again, more of the festive dancing. Next slide. This is called Golden Lane. If you go up to Prague Castle, this is one of the remnants of the area where all of the craftsmen that worked for the king and his court lived, and they made swords, they made armor, there was a bakery, and all of these buildings all the way down this street were people who their specific task was to make things for the king and his court. And so this is Golden Lane. You now have to pay to just walk down Golden Lane at most of the time. So next slide. Another couple, again, I don't know them. Sorry, I've been gone from there since 2006. So I don't, but some more of our missionaries, you can pray for them. Are there names? Are there names of these? You don't think so? Okay. All right. Well, you've seen two couples now, and you can pray for the folk. They live in Prague, I'm sure. Okay. Next slide. Czechs are more interested in Eastern religions like Buddhism, worship of Mother Earth, than they are Christianity. We covered that subject. Let's go on. Next slide. This is St. Vitus Cathedral. You see how massive it is? And that picture doesn't do justice to how huge it is on the inside. It took, I think, 200 years to finish. I don't remember, but it's just an incredible place. And yet you walk in there and you say, if you would yell out the name of Jesus, you just hear it echo. And people it's just a dead sound to them. Next slide. the statue of Jan Hus, middle of Old Town Square. You used to be able to go up and climb up on it. When we first got there, I didn't try that, but now you can't get, they've got it fenced in. Okay, next slide. This is summer English camps in the summer. I think some of these are Czechs and probably some of them are missionaries. But one of the things that our missionaries in Prague and in the Czech Republic, volunteers go over every year in the summer, and from all different ages, and they go and they spend a week or 2 weeks at a camp. And these young Czechs are interested in learning English. And so you'll sit and you'll have conversation, you'll read, and you'll help them get better at English. And the textbook that we use is, guess what? Exactly. So if we're going to learn to read English, we're going to learn to read from the Gospel of John or the Gospel of Mark. And so the seed gets sown in the hearts of people as they learn English. And every summer, I've got colleagues there that are still there that I do know that talk about the number of young people that come to faith, pray to receive Christ, and then are in the process of being discipled for an opportunity then to form either a new church, or if there's a church that they want to plug in with, that'll happen as well. Next slide. This is just a view of how it is. The architecture builds it right up against the street, and then all of the open space is in the courtyard behind all of these buildings. And it's just really it's a different way of looking at things, of building. And I found it quite intriguing to go into some of these old buildings and kind of tool around, and then oftentimes get run out because I wasn't supposed to be there. But next slide. That looks like a couple of little Czech boys, I imagine. Next slide. And again, more festivities. This is at the other end of Charles Bridge, near the Christmas market, one of the Christmas markets. Next slide. Czechs don't want to be told what to believe, and that is very true. In order to convince a Czech that they need Christ, that they need to follow the one true God, that they need to embrace Jesus as Savior, it is an intellectual exercise, oftentimes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But the reality is that their hearts are seeking for spiritual truth. And so you find where they are, you help them understand some of the things and some of the real gaps. When they're honest with you, the gaps in their lives that are missing, and that's where you start to plug in things. And when they finally understand, it isn't about somebody telling me what to do. It's about something that really will enhance my life, and it will make me complete. And they will then follow Christ, and they don't mind. They want to know what Jesus has to say. They're just not interested in the church. And so they don't mind Jesus telling them what to do once they come to faith. Next slide. This is the library at the seminary, the Catholic seminary on the west side of town. A lot of books. Okay, next slide. Old Town Square, this is the Orloi, the astronomical clock. Every hour, all 12 apostles appear. At the very top, you'll see two windows, two blue windows. There's a little angel sitting in between. And at the very top, those windows will open at the top of the hour. And the 12 apostles will all slide by. And then the cock will crow. And then it closes, and you have to wait another hour for it. It's interesting, too, because on all of these, even on the churches, they have these gargoyles that are sitting up there. They look like evil demons and stuff. And they run the water that runs off of the roof through the back of their neck, and it spews out through their mouth. But they got them up on top of the churches. I don't know what that's about. Next slide. This is Old Town Square again. You can see this John Hus statue, the Teen Chapel, another big church behind it, 2 spires. One of the spires is actually bigger than the other. It wasn't supposed to be that way, but it ended up that way. They built it. Something went wrong. Next slide. I don't know who this is, but she's pretty. All right, next slide. And so we're going to have to wrap up here pretty quick. Children who attend English summer camps interact with the gospel well. That's very true. Next slide. Another view of the city. Next slide. That's the back side of the National Museum. Next slide. They're a beautiful, beautiful people. Their little kids are just winsome, and the men and the women are just incredibly beautiful people, but they're just lost. Most all of them are lost, and so next slide. Another camp. Let's go on. Next slide. Old Town Square again. Next slide. I'll tell you what this is. This picture was taken, I'm pretty sure, from the office of where the IMB had its office in Prague several years ago. This is the main train station. And from here, you can go all over the country and go to all cities in Europe. But Hlavní nádraží. Hlavní is main, nádraží is train station. And I'll never forget, I was practicing my Czech, and when they toast to your health, they'll hold up a cup of champagne or whatever, and they'll go, na zdraví, which is to your health. And so I held mine up. I said, nádraží. And they looked. No. Nádraží is train station. Na zdraví is to your health. So, I've had many of those kinds of times with language. So anyway, I'm going to stop right here. I think we've had plenty of pictures. Do you have questions that you want to ask real quick? I know you guys are on a time schedule. I don't want to take away from any of that. You have some more that you want to add, Peggy? Okay. I'll be glad to answer questions. I'll hang around afterwards if you want to ask specific questions. Anybody, just strike you right quick that you want to just penetrate your soul, you want to ask? Have I confused you? You remember in 1989, was that when when was the Berlin Wall came down? 91. The Berlin Wall came down, and country by country by country, throwing out the communists. We're going to have new people come in. So they had the new party that came in, and most of them were members of the old Communist Party. So they did things pretty much the same way as they did before. It's just they didn't call it communism anymore. But almost every country, with a couple of exceptions, just kind of cast the communists aside. And Russia was weak at the time, and so they didn't exert anything. And so when the Berlin Wall came down, that was when things began to unravel.
Thank you. Maybe we can identify better now, and we can pray more intelligently when we study about Prague and the rest of the countries where our missionaries are serving now and how important that is. The flag behind me, I was supposed to have done this at the beginning, but the white represents the people of the Czech Republic and their peaceful nature and their honesty. The red, and I had to hang the flag backward because the red is always on the right side. But the red represents the courage and the hardness during the wars. The blue that represents the vigilance, the truth, the loyalty, and the perseverance of the people there. So there's a lot of people that I want to thank. That Carolyn Campbell has really worked to put these pictures together for us, and Mitzi Carlton has provided our program. Thank you so much for doing that, and for all of those who have helped make this possible. One thing that I wanted to share with you, the cake and the switches here, one of the missionaries in our study book said that two men forced their way in the house, and they were gently swatting her legs, and she tried to smile and laugh it off, but they kept forcing their way in, beating her legs. And she said she didn't know the custom of the people. So they told her, said, we're gonna keep swatting your legs until you give us a gift. So she reached in the Easter basket. This was at Easter time, and she grabbed some of the children's candy and gave it to them and sent them on their way. But what she did not know, that was a blessing. They were laying a blessing on her of fertility and which she didn't want, and for the prosperity for the coming year. And it was really an honor to be whipped with a switch. So I really had to work hard to get the switches, the willow switches. So Carolyn's daughter, Rachel, provided those for us. And the cake was the same way. They had used the lamb cake at Easter time, and when the missionaries said, why do you use the cake? Nobody knew why, but they used this to tell them about the Lamb of God. So I thought that was so important that the church ordered the cooking pans or the baking pans for me, and I could bake the cake. When we have Easter time, then we can pray specifically for these dear people that are so lost. And thank you so much for sharing with us. And I'm going to ask, does anyone have anything to say before we're dismissed? I'm going to ask my husband, Ken, if he will dismiss us, please. Would you stand, please? Okay. Okay. Okay.
My wife,
Okay, I can just.
my wife, when